Your Humanities Half Hour is brought to you by the Northern Marianas Humanities Council, navigating the human experience together.
Hafide Zantero, welcome to your Humanities Half Hour. I'm Catherine Perry, and our guest today is the 2023 Governor's Humanities Awardee as Outstanding Humanities Teacher in the Classroom, William Fife. William, welcome to the show.
Half a day in Thoreau. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Well, thank you for coming today and sharing with us kind of what you've been doing here in the Marianas in the classroom. But maybe you could start off for those who don't know you. How did you and your family end up here back in 2016, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
We're adventurers, so we came from a prior adventure in the Marshall Islands. My wife and I, before we had our children together, spent 2 years in the Marshall Islands working with Micronesian Legal Services Corporation, and then I took a promotion with them that moved me here, and that's how I ended up here, and our family ended up here, and then our 2 children were born here in Saipan, so very proud of that. Even though I'm not, I love that my kids are born here because we love it here. Yeah.
Well, your wife also has won a Humanities Award, so we're so really blessed to have you guys here as part of the community and contributing the way you do. You started off in 2018 teaching history at Kegman High. How was that?
Well, it was great. I actually started off as an English hire.
Okay.
I taught so many different classes, ELA, high school success, that was my favorite. Also taught U.S. history and co-op for most of my time, mostly just U.S. history and co-op. And I loved all the classes, they were all great. But I got there wanting to transition from lawyering, even though I enjoyed my legal aid career with Micronesian Legal Services. Really wanted to get into education. I had done some adjunct faculty work where I got my master's degree, and really loved teaching, and so the idea of teaching stuck in the back of my head. And when I was ready to transition from lawyering to education, it was a smooth transition because I had such great people around me at Cagman. I was hired by one of our great local leaders, Layla Staffler. She was my principal staffler that hired me there, and it's been great watching her grow as a leader in our community, and she was a phenomenal leader in Cagman. I don't know if you remember G. Van Gils. He was
Yes.
a good friend of mine.
Mr. G.
Yeah, Mr. G, CG. Yeah, and he was working there at the time, and so he kind of recruited me there and interviewed with Principal Staffler, and just fell in love with the community there. I liked how there was a strong indigenous community and vibe at Cagman, and yeah.
So I asked you something new we're doing on the show now, to bring something that kind of represented your work or you as a person, and I was surprised to learn that you are, shall we say, a skull person.
I am. Yes, so I brought one of my skulls. I have several.
One of many skulls,
One of
apparently.
many skulls, yeah. This is actually, I can't remember if this is my sons or daughters, but we have several skulls in the home, and I've got a bigger skull in my office at Northern Marianas College.
Wait, did you say you have skulls on your earrings?
Yes,
Okay.
they're even on my earrings. Yes.
Okay, so what is it about the skull that's representative of you?
Oh,
or your
so
work?
many different things. I could go in so many different directions, but most relevant for today's discussion is how the connection of and the symbolism and the importance of skulls in ancient Chamorro cultural history. You also have significant perhaps one of the most sacred spots in Saipan, Calavera Cave, Skull Cave. They were adorned in the gumas, in the homes. Of course, many of them were destroyed by the Spanish. But the importance, the ancestor worship, the connection to the ancestors and the ancestors' spirits and the animism within nature, the spirituality embedded in kind of like the symbolism of the skulls. I have featured, in my, whether it be my classroom in Cagman or my office at NMC, they're good conversation starters, right? And so it gives me an opportunity to dialogue with Mr. Fife, Professor Fife, what's up with the skulls? And so we get to have this conversation where it's, a bridge not only from understanding ancient cultural history, but so many different things to today. I also love the concept of memento mori. So it's a relic of death to really heighten life and the appreciation of every moment counting, carpe diem, seize the day. So I try to, and that was one of the most formative messages and one of the most influential periods of my education in middle school was watching Dead Poets Society and learning about carpe diem.
Okay.
So
yeah,
carpe
yeah,
diem,
yeah.
memento mori,
Life
really
and death.
fits together.
Yeah.
So thinking about life and death and trying to inspire students to not only be in touch with what the ancient cultural history behind skulls are, but also to seize the day and really take advantage of the moment, live in the present.
So one of the things I've heard is that you have a particular method in your teaching that kind of makes you, apparently it helps the kids think more critically. Socratic method. Can you explain to us what this is and maybe give us an example?
Sure.
Give us a little lesson right here using the Socratic method.
Okay, sure, yeah. Well, for those that have never heard of it before, the Socratic method is rooted in the name for Socrates, the legendary ancient Greek philosopher, and he was known for this method of just continuous investigative dialogue of questioning down things, basically the essence of why and
oh no, not like a 3-year-old, but why?
Yes,
but
well,
why?
and I encourage that.
Okay.
I encourage my students to never stop asking why, and because the answers continually go down. Like it's like I said, it's like a never-ending investigative dialogue on questioning anything and everything, and it's a method. Obviously, I didn't come up with it, obviously, but different educators have different approaches to it. But I really think, to use a common phrase, it helps teach students how to think, not what to think, because it's an investigative process. It's a dialogue. And so I think students can enjoy that because I also oftentimes have them working in groups, and then we break it down to a group or class-wide discussion. So my approach is basically 3 steps. I'll provide up front what I call these critical thought questions. My students, if anybody's watching, will know these intimately. And so I front load the students with the questions that they need to be aware of that we're going to come back to. And so I front load them with the questions.
For example?
Okay, so for example, critically thinking something that we have in our everyday existence surrounding us. Let's say names. So investigating the history of our names and why that's important, again, connecting to strengthening cultural identity, why it's important to investigate the history of our names. Most of my students, I'd say at least 75% of them are either Chamorro, Rafeloash, or Filipino. Obviously, I have other students from other diverse cultures, but those are the strong majorities, whether it's Cagman or at NMC. So we investigate these names. And so I asked them in advance, question, let's, in a rigorous and relevant way, and in an empathetic way, is it important to decolonize? Should the CNMI, should Carolinians, should Filipinos consider further decolonization? Is it healthy for a strong cultural identity to have your names based on, to be honest, colonizers that oppressed your very own ancestors? Okay, so those are some examples,
yeah.
questions, and then we investigate primary and secondary sources, exploring the history behind these names, and whether it be books, articles, videos. I engage with the students. I provide some resources to investigate this, and then they break up in their small groups for the third step, and they talk about the questions and answers. They can research other sources, anything. This is a time where they can use computers and come up with their own answers to these questions. And it's really fascinating to hear their answers, because you'll have a wide range of students discussing among themselves, debating whether in-person or online classes with our forums, online forums, hearing students discussing whether or not we should change our names. And that's a really powerful conversation, oftentimes disturbing and triggering. If you want to investigate, so like some of the information that they're investigating, Marianas, surrounded all over, right?
Mm-hmm.
Viva Marianas, Marianas Strong, Marianas High School, mm-hmm. Marianas College. Where does the name Marianas come from? Queen Mariana, right? She was Queen Regent during most of the 30-year War of Resistance by the Chamorros, the resistant Chamorros against the Spanish and the Chamorros that fought alongside the Spanish. And so during this period, you have massive loss of life from Chamorros, the forced relocation to Guahan, mm-hmm. The burning of the Sacman sailboats, like a devastating time of our history. And our students grapple with, should we be naming ourselves after the leader that was in charge during that time? Caroline Islands, Carolinian. Right? So I focused earlier on by saying Rafellowash, because I don't like using the term Carolinian or Caroline Islands. It brings to images the colonial history, in my opinion, and it's hard to discuss things related to that, because the students are learning, well, where does the name Carolinian come from? Mm-hmm. Queen Mariana's son, Prince Carlos.
I did not know that. Thank you.
Yeah, so you have the Carol, not after a Queen Carol, mm-hmm. but after Carlos. Mm-hmm. And he was so deformed, disabled, disfigured from generations of incest. So you have somebody that can't rule, hence Queen Regent Mariana. And so you have cultural identities coming after these names, and of course, a much older generation of the same family. So these are all Habsburgs, Spanish Habsburgs, same family. Incestual, powerful European empire, going back to King Philip, hence the Philippines. The Spanish Empire enslaved Filipinos, indigenous Filipinos in encomienda. So the students debate and discuss the pros and cons of continuing or changing these critical names, and that's just like a tip of the iceberg in discussing like an investigation on using the Socratic method in a critical thinking, but in a rigorous and relevant way for the students to explore.
I can imagine their minds must be like kind of blown after a semester with you, and they come out like really thinking differently about a lot of things. What is the feedback you get from them?
I would say it's, I'm proud to say, I think for the most part it's somewhat similar to what you just described, and that's definitely part of my goal. Like, I love blowing my students' minds, right? Like, I love, but I try to do it in as much of a empathetic way, right? And I try to encourage all the students to practice empathy and learning, because again, like, these are difficult topics, mind-blowing topics, but difficult, and we have to be really careful about creating a safe environment where people are comfortable to discuss these oftentimes triggering histories and the ongoing legacies that connect the ancient history of colonization to today through things like intergenerational trauma and stuff like that.
Well, we're chatting today with William Fife. He is the 2023 Governor's Humanities Awardee as Outstanding Humanities Teacher in the Classroom. You've just heard an example of why. We'll be back with more after this break.
Hafaday, Zantiro. I'm Leo Pangilinan with the Northern Marianas Humanities Council. We'd like to take a moment to thank our generous sponsors who have made possible the many programs in our community like this show. We couldn't have done it without them. And if you value the work we do and would like to make a contribution to our efforts, we ask that you consider making an in-kind or cash contribution to the Northern Marianas Humanities Council. Any amount is appreciated, and donations of up to $5,000 qualify for an educational tax credit. We appreciate your partnership and support. Sidus Maasi, Olomai, and thank you.
Welcome back. William, you also are now teaching at NMC, History and Principles of Democratic Institutions.
Yes.
What are you seeing as far as the understanding of today's student at NMC when it comes to the topic of democratic institutions and why it's important to them?
Well, that's a great question, and I'm glad you asked that, because one of the biggest topics, and it's a common denominator in both the history classes, whether it's the U.S. and world history classes or the principles of democratic institutions or current issues in the CNMI classes. They're all history, political science, and so I'm able to overlap common denominators in each of the classes. And one of the common denominators that the students love exploring is second-class citizenship. So as we're gearing up for the presidential elections in next year, the students are understandably curious and oftentimes negatively impacted by this feeling of exclusion, not being included in the democracy of the country. And so you have historic examples that feed into that reasoning. You have democratic institutions that feed into that. You have current issues in the CNMI that feed into that issue. So from there, we're able to see the intersections of history, political science, current issues in the environment, or in health disparities. You can explore that issue, and that's what the students really love exploring. Like, we have student groups in all these classes, or at least the principles of democratic institutions and the current issues class, I have them in the small groups in the in-person classes, research the topics and have them explore various self-determination options, because again, this is going back to the Socratic method, because most of the time the covenant, our current status as a commonwealth, U.S. territory, is for the most part celebrated, and for good reason for the most part. There's a lot of good that comes from that. But again, applying the Socratic method, we have to question everything and anything, and that includes the current status quo. And when students are not participating in democracy, yes, they can vote locally, but especially now with the internet and social media, we're interconnected more than ever through all kinds of mediums, and the students are learning and feeling left out for the most part. There's some students that would advocate for a status quo, but it's very interesting to have them investigate, decide like various potential options. Should we stay at Commonwealths? Do you want to stay the status quo? Because you can amend the covenant. We could go for statehood. We could go for independence. We could go for free association. And so having the students investigate this from, whether it's a historical perspective, like why are things the way they are right now? Why are we considered second-class citizens? Is it just a coincidence that over 98% of the Americans living in U.S. territories are denied the right to vote? It's a complicated story, and there's many moving parts here, and so it's interesting to have different classes kind of study the intersections of history, government, current issues. I'd say that's the biggest topic that they're really interested in exploring the most.
You've worked here in the Pacific for 12 years, various areas of public service. You mentioned Marianas Legal Services Corporation. You also were in the Peace Corps. You're also licensed to practice law here and in the Marshall Islands. You brought a couple of publications actually kind of representing your connection, the connection you feel with the Pacific. What is it you hope students will walk away with as a result of the way that you were teaching them in your classes?
Oh, well, thank you for that question. And just to clarify, I'm inactive, so I'm no longer practicing attorney. So
thank you.
Yeah, just wanted to clarify that. So I'm fully just an educator now. But I do love applying the legal education and the legal experience that I had working throughout, as you said, with MLSC.
A wealth of knowledge that you bring, yeah.
They have offices throughout Micronesia, multiple in the Marshall Islands, throughout the FSM, Palau, here. So I was able to really learn kind of like big picture, but also zooming in to more local issues. Really afforded an interesting perspective on Pacific issues and Pacific peoples and the culture and the history. And of course, like you said, that began with my time in the U.S. Peace Corps. And I wouldn't be here today without that experience. And I fell in love with Pacific Islander culture and people and the environment and public service. And I always encourage my students to volunteer, because I'm always like, you're going to get more from it than what you give. I guarantee it, or at least that's been my experience. I know it's others. So I've kind of gotten hooked on that kind of focus. And so I was a small business developer doing income generation projects and Outer Islands youth groups. And so I was able to work with young people from the islands and from outer islands. Mm-hmm. And some of us here in the islands are unfamiliar with what outer island life is like. And some of our students coming in like to PSS, come from some of the outer islands in the FSM. And they know, and I was able to connect with a lot of those students in ways that maybe other people weren't, because I could relate with that experience. Yeah.
So what are you hoping they're going to get from being in Mr. Fife's class?
Oh, I just hope that they feel empowered. That's my biggest goal, is to empower my students to apply the education that they get from the classroom into their lives. That there's a reason for it, that it's not just a class that they have to take to get a degree, to get a job, etc. Right? It's to empower them right now, and they're so inspiring. They really inspire me. Seeing their growth, whether it's from just within a semester or even over the years. Like now I'm having some of my Cagman High School students as NMC students, which is just a phenomenal experience. And I love seeing all the Cagman Azuzu's on campus. So I hope they understand that someone that is not like them, that even though I'm a white male American teaching predominantly non-white students, that they know that the typical narrative that has been driven to understand whether it's local history, U.S. history, world history, generally written by people not from their perspective. As good intentioned as those other writers, historians may be, you have this notion of histories written by the victors. I want them, which a lot of them are indigenous students, and whether they're indigenous from the CNMI or elsewhere, that they feel empowered about their culture, that they at the end of their time with me, that they go through this growth period where that they will view their cultural identity in a different way, that they see it as empowering and as a roadmap to success and strong academic performances and health outcomes. So I really want them to feel empowered by applying critical thinking and really embracing their cultural identity to strengthen them, to empower them.
Well, before we wrap up the show, you did bring one more item that you said was representative of you or your work. Can you share with us what that is?
Well, we got a couple. This one, you want this?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm sure you know what these are, what this is, right? This beautiful piece here. Custom made by legendary,
you should have been wearing that since the beginning. That looks so nice.
Oh, well, thank you. I should have been wearing it from the beginning.
Okay.
But, by Sinta Kaipat, who I hope one day that there is a statue for her somewhere on Saipan. She, huge inspiration and influence on me. Really bringing things full circle from my time at MLSC and transitioning to being an educator in the CNMI, going from lawyering to teaching, was the Pagan protests. And I was incredibly inspired by Sinta Kaipat's advocacy. One of the first experiences I had at Cagman High School, I put together an event where Sinta Kaipat and Pete Perez came to speak about their Pagan activism and what the potential consequences of live fire weapons testing in beautiful volcanic islands. So she also had, I think, a warm place in her heart for me because she had such, not necessarily because of who I am, but maybe a little bit, because she and her cousin sister, Josie Kaipat, we just lost both of them sadly recently, grew up in the Northern Islands, and they used to have Peace Corps volunteers there. So knowing that I'm a Peace Corps volunteer, I was automatic in. And that's been a never-ending return on investment, if you will, from my Peace Corps. I'm able to connect with people here almost immediately, but it also gives me a point of reference for my whether it's our publications with my brilliant and beautiful wife and collaborator, NMC's Dr. Baylul Solomon, or teaching in the classroom. I try to keep this and keep Sinta Kaipat's spirit alive, her ancestors' spirit alive, and she's been a big influence on me ever since I met her, and so that's the story behind this piece.
It's beautiful.
Thank you. I can't take credit for it, but.
Well, you can take credit for being the kind of person that she would want to give it to.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yes. Thank you for your time. Special. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we end today?
I just want to thank you for having me. I'm incredibly honored and humbled to be here, and all the work that Northern Marianas Humanities Council does, critical work, amazing work. I just want to thank you and your whole team of awesome people doing great work in the community, keeping culture alive and strong here in the Santa Maya. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the partnership.
Yeah.
Our guest today has been William Fife. He is the 2023 Governor's Humanities Awardee for Outstanding Humanities Teacher in the Classroom, and I think you've seen why. This has been your Humanities Half Hour. I'm Catherine Perry.
Your Humanities Half Hour has been made possible in part by a major grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Democracy demands wisdom. Any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this program do not necessarily represent those of the National Endowment for the Humanities. For more information or to share your thoughts, contact the Northern Marianas Humanities Council at nmhcouncil.org or on social media at 670 Humanities. That's 670 Humanities.